On the surface, Ethan Miller was just a quiet single dad, working long hours at a small-town garage and raising his little girl with all the love he had left. But behind his worn hands and steady smile lay a past he had locked away, a soldier's training, scars, and secrets he swore never to use again. One ordinary night, everything changed. When Ethan stumbled upon a powerful CEO being dragged into a van by kidnappers, he faced a choice that would rip open the wounds of his past. What followed was more than a rescue, it was the beginning of an unthinkable connection. A path toward truth, redemption, and a second chance at family. This is a story about courage in the face of fear, love born from pain, and the healing power of trust. Ethan Miller had grown used to living in the quiet margins of life. Every morning began with the whistle of a dented kettle and the laughter of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who could make even a cold kitchen feel like home. His hands, roughened by years of working under car hoods at the small garage on the edge of town, were more accustomed to grease than tenderness, yet they always seemed gentle when buttoning her coat or braiding her hair clumsily before school. To neighbors, Ethan was simply a widowed mechanic, steady, quiet, perhaps a little too private. But behind that quiet exterior lay a man who carried a past he never spoke of. Years ago, Ethan had been a soldier, trained in operations that demanded silence, precision, and sacrifice. He had walked away from that life after tragedy struck, the sudden death of his wife in what was officially labeled a car accident. To the world, it was a closed chapter. To Ethan, it was an open wound, a loss shadowed by unanswered questions. He buried that part of himself, vowing never to let it bleed into the life he was building for Lily. That Friday night, Lily was drowsy in the backseat after a birthday party, her hair smelling of frosting and balloons still tied around her wrist. And Ethan smiled at her in the mirror, grateful for these small, ordinary victories. But fate has a way of unraveling the ordinary. As he drove through a dimly lit parking structure shortcut, a commotion caught his eye. Harsh voices. A woman's muffled cry. He slowed, scanning the shadows. A black van with its doors open, 2 men forcing a woman inside. Her heels scraped desperately against the concrete, her hands clawing at the air. Under the flicker of a failing lamp, her face came into view, Victoria Hayes, the young CEO whose name dominated business headlines, now gasping in terror. Ethan's heart clenched. He could keep driving. He could keep Lily safe and pretend he hadn't seen. But then Victoria's eyes, wide and desperate, locked with his. And in that instant, memory sliced through him like glass. His wife's final moments, the helplessness that still haunted his sleep. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, torn between duty as a father and the instinct that screamed he couldn't abandon her. Then another detail caught his attention, a tattoo inked across one kidnapper's wrist. Ethan froze. He knew that mark. He had seen it years ago, in a briefing photo tied to a covert mission. This wasn't random. It was connected, and it shook him to his core. He forced the truck into motion, driving Lily a few blocks away to the small bungalow of Mrs. Parker, their kind elderly neighbor. Knocking at her door, Ethan whispered that an emergency at the shop needed his attention. Mrs. Parker welcomed Lily without hesitation, her soft hand brushing his arm in reassurance. Ethan kissed his daughter's forehead, lingering longer than usual, imprinting her safety on his heart. "Be good for Mrs. Parker, I'll be back soon," he murmured. Lily, still half asleep, nodded and clutched her balloon tighter. Back in the cab of his truck, Ethan exhaled shakily. He had promised himself he was done with that world, the one where men carried weapons in the shadows and secrets lived longer than truth. But some promises can't survive when innocence is at stake. He turned the truck back toward the parking structure, his mind already switching gears, calculating angles, exits, and the odds stacked against him. The soldier he thought he had buried stirred awake. Victoria was shoved into the van. The doors slammed. Ethan parked just out of sight, slipping into the night like the ghost he once was, every sense sharpened. The mission was no longer abstract, it was here now. He thought of Lily, of the wife he couldn't save, of the tattoo that told him this was no coincidence. The decision was made. He would not fail again. As the van roared to life, Ethan melted deeper into the shadows, ready to follow. And in that moment, he knew, stepping forward tonight would tear open the past he had fought to bury. But it might also be the only way to change the future for Victoria, for Lily, and for himself. The van barreled through the night, its tires screeching as it turned down deserted streets. Ethan followed at a distance, headlights dimmed, his mind slipping into the old rhythm he thought he had buried forever. The soldier in him assessed everything, the route they chose, the way they signaled one another, the weapons they likely carried. He recognized discipline, but also sloppiness. These men weren't professionals, at least not anymore. They were mercenaries chasing shadows, dangerous because they underestimated who might be watching. The van pulled into an abandoned textile warehouse, its metal doors rusted and bent. Ethan parked far enough away to stay unseen, then slipped into the night. His boots made no sound on the gravel. The air was thick with mildew dust and the faint hum of a generator powering dim lights inside. He crouched by a broken window and peered in. Victoria Hayes was tied to a chair, her designer suit torn, her face pale but defiant. She spat words at her captors. "You won't get what you're after," her voice trembling but strong. Ethan's chest tightened. She was terrified, but she wasn't broken. 3 men circled her. One leaned in close, sneering. "Your company dug too deep. Miss Hayes, maybe you should have learned what happens to people who ask the wrong questions. Remember the accident in 2017? His words sliced through Ethan like a blade. 2017, the year his wife had died. Accident. The word rang false in his ears. He shifted, his pulse thundering. Could it be connected? He forced himself to focus. The soldier in him knew emotion could get him killed, but the husband in him couldn't ignore the possibility that this moment was bound to his own tragedy. He needed chaos. He loosened a rusted pipe from the wall and tossed it across the floor. The clang reverberated through the warehouse, pulling their attention. Ethan moved swiftly, slipping through a side entrance. His steps were silent, his movements deliberate. The first man went down with a chokehold before he could raise the alarm. Ethan dragged his limp body into the shadows. Then he advanced, his eyes sharp, his body low. The second man swung around, spotting him too late. Ethan's fist met his jaw, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. Victoria gasped, her eyes locking with Ethan's. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she didn't know whether to fear him or trust him. But the steadiness in his gaze told her the truth. He was here for her. "Stay quiet," he whispered, cutting through the rope with a blade he had pulled from his belt. "When I move, you follow." She nodded, trembling, but her jaw tightened with determination. The third kidnapper lunged with a knife, slashing wildly. The blade grazed Ethan's arm, tearing through fabric and skin, but adrenaline dulled the sting. He twisted the man's wrist, slammed him into the pillar, and sent the weapon clattering across the floor. Victoria, seizing her moment, kicked the knife further out of reach with surprising force. Ethan finished the fight, leaving the man groaning on the ground. He grabbed Victoria's hand. "We don't have long." They darted toward the exit, Ethan guiding her through corridors as shouts echoed behind them. More footsteps pounded in the distance. Reinforcements. Ethan pushed open a side door and led her into the alley, using every shortcut in the industrial maze to keep them ahead. He ducked behind dumpsters, shielded her with his body, and motioned for silence until the shouts faded. When they finally paused, Victoria's breath came in ragged gasps. She studied him, her voice hushed. "You're not just some mechanic. Who are you?" Ethan met her gaze, his jaw clenched. Just someone who couldn't walk away. But inside, his thoughts were spinning. The kidnapper's mention of 2017 wasn't an accident, it was a message. a thread tying Victoria's danger to his own loss. Sirens wailed in the distance, flashing red and blue lights reflecting against broken glass. Ethan knew he couldn't stay. If he did, there would be questions, exposure, and Lily's life would no longer be safe. He pressed a hand to his wounded arm, already pulling back into the shadows. Victoria reached out, her voice urgent. "Wait, at least tell me your name." He hesitated, then gave her the only piece of truth he could. "Ethan." Then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving her with more questions than answers. Later, as Victoria sat wrapped in a blanket in the back of a police car, her mind refused to rest. The kidnappers had failed, but the stranger who saved her carried secrets of his own. His skill, his scars, the haunted look in his eyes, it was as though their fates had been intertwined long before tonight. She whispered his name, almost to herself. Ethan. She knew this wasn't over. She would find him again, not just because he saved her, but because the truth demanded it. Victoria Hayes was not one to let mysteries go unanswered. In the days after the kidnapping, while her board begged her to retreat and recover, her mind clung to one word spoken in that warehouse: accident. 2017, the year her rescuer's wife had died. The year her father's company signed controversial defense contracts. The threads tangled in her head, demanding clarity. And then there was Ethan, the quiet mechanic with the soul of a soldier. Gratitude had pulled her back to him, but something deeper, something unshakable, was telling her their lives were already bound together. She found him at the garage. Lily's laughter was the first thing she heard before she saw him, bent over the hood of a rusting pickup. His daughter perched on a stool nearby with a pencil tucked behind her ear like a little apprentice. It was such a simple, warm picture that Victoria felt an ache in her chest. Ethan straightened when he noticed her, his jaw tightening, his first instinct to shield Lily from whatever storm she brought. But Lily's curious smile cut through the tension. "Daddy, is she your friend?" Victoria knelt, meeting the girl's bright eyes. "I'd like to be," she said softly. That single line cracked open Ethan's defenses. Over the weeks that followed, she became a presence in their lives. She brought coffee, helped Lily with school projects, and stayed for dinners where burnt grilled cheese and laughter filled the air. Ethan tried to resist, but the warmth that settled over his home was undeniable. For the first time since his wife's death, he saw Lily basking in the kind of joy that came from more than just survival. And Victoria, so used to sterile boardrooms and icy stares, found herself thawing in the glow of this small, imperfect family. But the shadows hadn't lifted. One evening, Victoria placed a folder on Ethan's kitchen table, her hand trembling slightly. "These are files from my father's tenure at Hayes Technologies. I think your wife's accident wasn't an accident at all." Ethan's body went rigid, his hand clenching around his coffee cup. Inside were records of payments, backroom dealings, and names Ethan recognized from missions that had gone wrong. It wasn't just random corruption. It was personal. His wife had been silenced for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, tied to contracts Hayes Technologies had refused to cover up. The revelation was a blow to Victoria too. My father. He might have been involved. I don't know how deeply, but this stain, it's part of my family's legacy. Her voice cracked, pain evident. Ethan expected to feel rage, but instead he saw her torment and guilt. For the first time, he realized she wasn't an heiress to corruption, but another victim of it. And in her eyes he saw not betrayal, but the same hunger for justice that had kept him awake at night for years. Instead of tearing them apart, the truth bound them closer. Together, they chose to turn pain into purpose. Victoria announced the creation of a foundation, one aimed at supporting veterans, single parents, and families broken by corporate and political greed. Ethan, reluctant at first, stepped into a role as advisor, using his past not as a source of shame, but as a tool to protect others. It was a chance to transform scars into something meaningful. Amid this mission, their bond deepened. Nights were spent not in silence, but in shared stories, Victoria confessing the loneliness of being a CEO groomed by a father who valued power above love. Ethan revealing the burden of raising Lily without a partner. Slowly, they built trust not from grand gestures but from simple acts. Victoria washing dishes beside him. Ethan fixing her car without being asked. Lily crawling into Victoria's lap as though it were the most natural thing in the world. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Lily took Victoria's hand at the dinner table. "Will you stay with us tomorrow too?" The innocence of the question made both adults pause. Ethan looked at Victoria, the walls around his heart softening. "Maybe it's time," he said quietly, not just to her but to himself. And Victoria, eyes glistening, nodded. Their journey culminated in a spring morning at the park. Lily skipped ahead chasing butterflies, laughter ringing in the air. Ethan walked beside Victoria, his hand brushing hers before finally intertwining. "When I saved you that night," he murmured, "I thought it was about redemption, but it gave me something else. A second chance at life." Victoria smiled, leaning into him. "Then let's make it count, together." As the three of them walked beneath the sunlight, the darkness of their past no longer loomed quite so heavy. What began with violence and secrets had turned into healing, love, and the birth of a new family, a reminder that even from brokenness, something whole and beautiful could emerge. Some stories remind us that the past doesn't have to define the future. For Ethan, a single dad carrying grief and secrets, one night of courage opened the door to love, healing, and the family he never thought he would find again. For Victoria, a woman trapped by power and legacy, trust and kindness became her way back to hope. Together, they proved that even from loss and betrayal, something beautiful can rise. Their journey is a reminder that second chances are real, and sometimes they arrive when we least expect them. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more soul-stirring tales of love, family, and redemption.